Hello again, I'm Dr. De Leon, Physical Medicine Rehabilitation Specialist, continuing a series of lectures. Today we're doing electrocardiogram, and for those who wonder why it's electrocardiogram ECG, we don't say that. We say EKG because then you get confused with EEG, electroencephalogram, which is a brainwave thing. So, I started my career as a combat medic in the Army, became an emergency medical technician, worked in the 911 New York system, went on to the military medical school, Uniformed Services University. Have been an EMT course director at Fort Campbell, been teaching medical students, primary care residents, nurse practitioner residents for years, and I decided to now put these on YouTube and see if I can spread the knowledge. And so please subscribe. I already have a series out there on vital signs and some neurological things. Today, as I said, we're doing electrocardiogram. The intent is not to make you the EKG expert, rather to help you understand when you're doing an EKG, what's going on, and be able to identify some critical things that you can then pass along to the provider. And if you're going into ACLS, really help you understand all the different rhythms in ACLS and the treatments, and anticipate the treatments based on your role. All right, so let us start with the heart is a muscle. All right, just like your biceps, just like your intestines. And the purpose of a muscle is to contract and perform an action. So a muscle is either contracted or relaxed, one of the two. And so what makes a muscle contract? Well, in the case of your bicep muscle, we take out a piece of bicep muscle, put it in a petri dish, add electrolytes, add glucose, add oxygen, add love. It's just going to sit there and look at us. It needs electricity. So I go get some jumper cables, I'll get up to my car battery and go, bzz, and that muscle will twitch. So it needs electricity. In your body, it gets electricity from the nerves, carrying an electrical impulse. So nerves are just no more than copper wiring, carrying it from your brain down through your spinal cord, out the nerves to your biceps, shock your biceps, muscle moves. In the case of your heart, it's a unique muscle in that each cell generates its own electricity. All right? So if I take a piece of heart muscle cell out, put in a petri dish, add electrolytes, add glucose, add water, add oxygen, add love. After a little while, it's going to start to twitch on its own because it's generating its own electricity. So it has an inherent rate at which it's firing. If I take a second muscle cell out and do the same thing, it's going to have its own inherent rate. And they're going to be different. So let's say the first one's beating at 50 times a minute. The second one's beating at 70 times a minute. All right? And then I let the two heart muscle cells touch each other. The question becomes, now if they're touching, do they continue to beat independently, or they somehow coordinate and beat together? And survey says, let's see where the head nods go, or the head. So I see a lot of north-souths, and I agree. They're going to start beating together. So the question becomes, what is the new inherent rate? So do they beat at 50? Do they beat at 70? Do they average to 60, or do they go to 120? All right? And many times I do these surveys, the most popular answer, if you're guessing, is 60 at this amount average. Occasionally I get that person that says they're going to bundle up and go to 120. But the real answer is they're going to go to 70. And here's the reason why. You imagine we're on a starting line, and there's a bunch of us in the starting line, and the gun goes off, and we all start racing down the road. And one of us is going to be the faster one, and whoever crosses the line first they're going to fire electrically first. Pause it. All right. So sorry for the pause. All right. So again, you're racing down. Somebody's going to cross the finish line first. Whoever crosses the finish line first, they're going to fire electrically. They're going to grab everybody's hand, going to share the electricity. Everybody's going to sing Kumbaya, fire electrically, then fire mechanically, squeeze the blood, and reset back to the starting line. So we're back at the starting line. Gun goes off again. We start racing down. All right. The same person that was fastest last time is going to be fastest this time. Crosses the finish line first. Grabs everybody's hand, fires electrically, shares the electricity. Everybody sings Kumbaya, squeezes mechanically, squeezes the blood, and resets back to the starting line. So there's someone that's always going to win the race, always going to fire first, spread the electricity, and everybody mechanically fires. If you take that person out, that cell out, then the second fastest will take over and fire electrically. So there's always somebody ready to fire. So in the heart, a nice little romantic heart. We have the right side, we have the left side. We got the atria and the ventricles. All right? Up in the right atria, you have the SA node, and that is the pacemaker of the heart. That's the one that's going to fire first. It's up in the right atria. It's going to fire, send its electricity across the heart. The question becomes, do we want that electricity to cross into the ventricles so that the atria and the ventricles are all stimulated together, all fire at exactly the same time, trying to squeeze blood at the same time? As we think about that, we want to understand blood is coming from the body through the atria to the ventricles, out to the lungs, and coming from the lungs through the left atria, left ventricle, back out to the body. So do we want all of this squeezing at exactly the same time together? And I see some heads and they're all going east-west, and I agree with you. So we got to stop that electricity from making it to the ventricles. So what God did is he took some electrical tape and he insulated the atria from the ventricles. So now that electrical signal in the atria is going to fire, spread across the atria, squeeze, send blood down to the ventricles. And the electricity can't make it to the ventricles. But now we got a problem. I want the ventricles to fire. So the question becomes, in designing the system, do we want the ventricles to have their own pacemaker? And we hope that these two pacemakers somehow coordinate, so the top fires, then the bottom fires, and the bottom fires only after the top fires. And that's very hard to coordinate, so God didn't do it that way. Instead, he put a little pinhole right there in the center. He put an antenna at the top, the AV node. He put in a resistor, so he went to Radio Shack when it still existed, bought a resistor, the bundle of his. And what does a resistor do? A resistor slows electricity down, all right? And in slowing it down, it buys you time for the atria to spread its electricity, squeeze, send blood down. So I've got a little pause in there time-wise, and then the electricity is going to fire rapidly into the ventricles along some specialized copper wiring. I always forget whether it's Purkinje or Purkinje, but we'll just call them P fibers. All right? So when we're looking at that, all right, I see, and we'll come back to this in a lot more detail, all of a sudden I see a blip of electricity. As the atria fire, I see a pause as it goes down the bundle of his. I see a rapid firing as it goes through the P fibers, and then the system resets back to the starting line. All right, and we'll get into more detail about that. But we just want to understand the concept that heart muscles each individually can fire electrically. All right, but somebody is going to fire first. Whoever fires first, in this case the SA node, that's up in the right atria, is going to fire electrically, spread electricity across the atria squeeze, send blood down to the ventricle. Electrical signal gets captured by the top of the antenna, the AV node, goes down the bundle of the resistor, and then down into the ventricles, and then the ventricles fire. So the atria fire, then the ventricles. And the ventricles don't fire unless the atria fires first. That's what we want. So we want a 1-to-1 ratio between the atria firing to the ventricle firing. And we want the atria to fire first and the ventricle to fire second. We never want the ventricle to fire before the atria. We want the ventricle only to fire after the atria. And we want to give that pause to give that blood a chance to go down. It's very critical in our understanding. Now, we get into the concept. May I borrow this? All right, and we're going to ask some questions here. And so we'll start.
It's all right.
You dropped one of those things that holds your rank on because you're already expecting to get promoted already. So we got to get rid of that soon. All right, so we'll start with you, Ms. Mao. What is this?
Control cap.
A patrol cap. Mr. Tolpe, what is this?
A patrol cap.
All right, as we continue around the room, what is that?
A PC.
Don't make my life
Oh,
difficult.
patrol cap.
Patrol cap, all right. So this object is a patrol cap, but we were seeing it from multiple different angles. That is the same as the heart. When we're doing an EKG, we are seeing one electrical event from multiple different angles. All right? So let us draw a compass. So I'll put a compass over my heart. All right, and the compass has 360 degrees. So this is sitting in someone's chest. And we're putting a circle over it and drawing a compass. And I'm going to start the counting here at this line. All right, and we're going to call that 0. As I go around clockwise, make that 90. I'm going to come around, I'm going to make this 180. But for whatever reason, whoever was first doing this for the heart, when they were counting and they went 178, 179, 180, they decided not to go 181, 182, 183. Instead, they decided to count backwards. But you can't go 178, 179, 180, 179, 178, because then you get confused. So they went 178, 179, 180, minus 179, minus 178, minus 90, minus 5, 4, minus 1, 0, 1. For whatever reason, that's how they did it. All right? Now, the reason we talk about seeing some from different angles and how it affects our view is we're going to start with the concept of a wave. There's a reason I'm going here. So if I'm standing on the beach, and I'll face this way, and I see a wave of 1 coming directly at me. I have a graph paper. I want to mark it on the graph paper. Every every box of the graph paper represents 1 foot height in wave. So if the wave is 10 feet high and it's coming directly at me, I'm going to mark on my graph 10 feet high, 10 boxes high, and put my mark. If that exact same wave is headed directly away from me, So I still see 10 feet high, but now it's going away. How do I show that mathematically? If toward me is positive 10, away from me is negative 10. And if there's somebody on the beach over there, and the wave is headed directly to them, so I'm marking it as negative 10, but they're standing over there, and it's coming directly at them, and from their perspective, it is positive 10. All right? But what happens if that wave isn't coming directly at me? It's coming at an angle. All right? So we're going to do this thing called a unit circle. Very bad circle. This is 1, 0 on the x-axis. This is 0, 1 on the y-axis. So this will be 0, negative 1. And that's negative 1, 0. For all you mathematicians out there who want it to look perfect, that's your xy axis. But it's 1 from the center, 1 from the center, 1 from the center. So this is a radius of 1. Now, if I'm standing over here, and this wave is coming directly at me, I'm going to see all of it, and I'm going to see 1. But what happens, and we've already said that if it's coming directly away from me, I'm going to see minus 1. So I'm just going to make this simple, go 1, minus 1. I know your mathematicians are, oh, you can't do it that way, whatever. All right, so if it's coming toward me, it's 1. It's coming directly away from me, it's minus 1. But what happens if it's coming at an angle? Well, you draw your triangle, and you go, well, it's coming toward me, but what I see is only here, so it's not quite 1. What happens if it's going here? At that angle. All right? It still has a height of 1, but what I see from my perspective is maybe a half. What happens when it's going directly perpendicular to me? Then I don't see anything. So a wave of 10 that is coming toward me, 10 high. Directly away from me, negative 10. Directly in front of me, across me like that, I can't see it at all because none of it's coming toward me or away from me. So as it swings around, I start to see it either in positive or negative land, and its size is in relationship to how much is coming toward me. So when we start looking at this, if I am standing here, so person standing here, here's the heart, we draw the compass circle, and I'm standing to the left on the 0 axis, the electricity that's coming straight at me in this plane, we're going to call that lead 1. And if I bend down and look at an angle of 60 degrees, we're going to call that lead 2. If I kneel down on this side and look at 120 degrees, we're going to call that lead 3. If I get down, straight down below them and look straight up and down, we're going to call that AVF for feet at 90 degrees. If I come up above their right shoulder, and I am looking at minus 150 degrees, we're going to call that AVR. If I am looking over their left shoulder at minus 30 degrees, I'm going to call that AVL for left. So, starting here, working my way around this person, looking at how the electricity is going. So if we think about it, the electricity is coming up from the right corner, coming across the atria, hitting the AV node, and then going down into the ventricle. And as it goes into the ventricle, you'll notice I put 1 blue wire on the right and 2 on the left. And the reason is that we got a lot more muscle on the right. Correction, a lot more muscle on the left side of the heart. than on the right. Not because the left pumps more blood, but because it has to pump it under a higher pressure. The two sides pump the exact same amount of blood. At any given time, more blood is on the body side than on the lung side, but over the course of a minute, they're both pumping, circulating the same amount of blood so it doesn't back up on either side. And that's another lecture about heart failure. But this one only, the right side only has to pump it to the lungs. Low pressure system, it doesn't have to go that far. The left side has to pump it throughout the entire body. So it has to generate a much larger pressure to drive that fluid, to drive perfusion through all those tissues. So the left side is much thicker. So there's a lot more electrical activity headed in this direction. So electricity seems to be going from upper right, where it starts, down to lower left. So as I come around, I'm sitting here at lead 1, it's coming toward me, but not directly at me, off at an angle. It's going to be positive, but it's not going to be that high. But as I come around to lead 2, it's coming right at me. So that's pretty big. AVF is pretty big. Lead 3, well, you know, it's going that way, it's going downwards, but it's kind of off angle again, like 1. And then AVR, it's going directly away, it's going the opposite direction, so AVR is going to be, it's going to see a lot of that wave, but it's going to be the opposite, it's going to be negative. And AVL, it's almost at right angles, it shouldn't see much at all. So by looking from these 6 angles, I can basically look at it from every 30 degrees and then go, okay, what am I happening at 0 degrees? At 30 degrees, I'm basically looking at AVR, just flip it upside down. Lead 2, AVF, lead 3. At 150, I'm looking at AVL, just flip it upside down. At 180, I'm looking at lead 1, just flip it upside down. AVR. At minus 120, I'm looking at lead 2, just flip it upside down. 90, I'm looking at lead AVF, flip it upside down. At minus 60, I'm looking at lead 3, flip it upside down. AVL, back down to 1. So I'm basically getting an idea of what's going on with electricity in the heart every 30 degrees. So it gives me a great view of what's going on in this plane. We call these the limb leads, and the reason we call them the limb leads is that's how we met. So you know, we got 4 limbs, we get 4 stickers, we put them, all right, by the 4 limbs. We could put it out on the wrist and the ankles, and it gives us the exact same thing, except for whatever mathematical reason, electrical reason, moving it up the legs to the groin, moving it up the arms to the shoulders, gives you the exact same outcome as putting it on the ankles and the wrist. All right, but we call these the limb leads because we get them by putting the EKG electrodes over the limbs. Then we have the other 6. We put the sticker in the front of the chest, here, 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 here. These are the precordial leads, and they're looking from front to back. So I'm looking at this angle, this angle, this angle, this angle, this angle, this angle, looking across the chest toward the heart from front to back. And so that gives me 6 leads in this plane, 6 leads in this plane, gives me 12 total leads, all right, to see that one electrical event from 12 different angles. And depending on what's going on, different angles are going to give me a better view of certain parts of the heart. And if that certain part is, is having damage, a heart attack or something, another view might not see it, but a different view will. So that's why I want to look from multiple different angles, see the heart from multiple different ways. All right? So, let us then, now that we understand concepts, every heart muscle is capable of generating electricity, but somebody goes first, somebody wins the race. The SA node wins the race. It sends electricity across the atria. There's electrical insulation between the atria and the ventricle so that the electricity does not make it down. It gets picked up by the antenna, the AV node, goes down the bundle of His, slowed down, and then rapidly out the P fibers into the ventricles. And it's headed in this direction. So, that's just concepts. Let's start putting it into practical applications, all right? So that when you're told, okay, let's get an EKG. You can sit there, you can tick on the 12 things on somebody, enter the demographics, hit the go button, and as it comes off, you can start understanding what the heck you're looking at. All right? Again, I'm not trying to make you the EKG expert. You need individual training for that. All right? But I want you to basically understand what's going on, so there's some critical things you can pick up, especially if you're going to go do ACLS training. So again, here's my heart. Right and left. Atrial ventricles. Here's my SA node. Sending its electricity across the atria. Here's my electrical insulation between the atria and the ventricle. Here's my little pinhole. Top to my AV node. My bundle of His. Resistor. My P fibers. Sending electricity into the ventricles. All right. So, one of the ways to look at it is to get a rhythm strip, to look at one angle, just look at it over time. 5, 10 seconds, whatever. So on the EKG, you're not only getting the 12 different leads, a lot of times you'll put on the EKG, do a rhythm strip, and the most popular one is lead 2, because it's in that direction. So you just hit lead 2 rhythm strip, and it'll give me that. So what I would expect to see is, okay, the SA node fires. I see a blip. It hits the AV node, goes down the bundle of His. There's a pause while it goes down. Then it hits the P fibers and rapidly goes throughout the ventricles, and then the system resets. And then the same race occurs, and another P wave, pause, P fibers, another P wave, pause, all right, P wave, pause, etc. So what I should see, if I'm looking from the same angle, is the same electrical event recurring every single time. It should look exactly the same. It should march out. So the P wave, I keep saying P wave, but when the SA node fires this wave of electricity, we call it the P wave. Then when it gets down here, we see these spikes. The first downward spike from baseline we call the Q wave. The first upward spike from baseline, all right, we call the R wave, or the first upward spike. The first downward spike after an upward spike we call the S wave. Why do I say not the second downward spike? Because sometimes, depending on the angle, you might not have a Q wave. So it might go straight to R. So RS, and we have P, Q, R, S. This must be a T wave. And we also break this down. This pause, while it goes through the AV node bundle of this, we call it the PR interval. And if you have that EKG paper, it's got little tiny boxes. It should be between 3 and 5 boxes. We measure from the beginning of the QRS complex, we call this the QRS complex, whether or not it has a Q, whether or not it has S or whatever, we call it a QRS complex. That should be 3 boxes really fast. Then we call this the ST segment. And then the T wave, the reset. All right, so that's each of these parts. Now the first thing I want to know is the overall thing looking exactly the same? Do I see a P wave, and every P wave looks exactly the same, and they march out? If I measure this, I measure this, I measure this, every single time it's exactly the same. All right, that tells me that it's coming out of the SA node, and it's exactly the same every single time. Whoever's generating it, it's the same one spot, and it's marching along. I should see the QRS nice and tight. That tells me that it's going down the B fibers. I should see this PR interval, pretty short. That gives me a function of the health of this T segment. So, and every P wave should be followed by a QRS. And every QRS should be preceded by a P wave. So I should see that 1-to-1 ratio between P wave and QRS complex. P wave, QRS complex, P wave, QRS complex, P wave, QRS complex. 1-to-1 ratio. That is very critical. If we don't see that, then we start thinking we have a problem. So that's one of the first things I look at. All right. And in terms of the P waves, again, I should see a P wave, and then I start looking at the total speed of this. Is it fast? If it's fast, rate 100, I have a tachycardia. If I see P waves and they're all the same, I have a sinus tachycardia, because this is a sinoatrial node. So it's coming out of the sinus. So it's a sinus tachycardia. And I start asking myself, why do I have a sinus tachycardia? Do I have a reason? Is the person in shock? Are they dehydrated? Are they excited? They just need time to calm down. They need some fluids, they need some blood, whatever. All right? But I know that electrically the heart is doing something correctly. The question is it responding to an abnormal situation, responding correctly to our situation, or is it just stimulated somehow, but it's firing electrically correct, it's just firing too fast, for whatever reason? All right? The next thing is, all right, it's firing too slow. Well, if it's less than 60, it's bradycardia. But if they have no symptoms, that slow heart rate is still putting out enough blood that it works, so nobody cares. So right now, if my pulse rate happened to be 55, nobody cares. I got normal mental status, no altered consciousness, no lightheadedness. So clearly my heart is doing its job, perfusing my brain, and I'm okay. But if it's not, if I'm getting lightheaded, altered mental status, I'm passed out, things like that, then maybe that bradycardia is the reason I'm just not putting out enough blood. And you got to jump in, and sometimes you even do CPR. All right, so we got the little kids, you're doing your BLS protocols, and you take a little child, they're having symptoms, their heart rate is slower than 100, and you start, or 80, and you start pumping away on that chest, and you start CPR while they still have a heartbeat, but it's not good enough. In the adults, you know, we start getting into, do I need to do CPR? Do I need to give medications? Because the brain talks to the heart is in charge of itself, but the brain talks to the heart and can tell the heart, hey, there's a lion over there, fight or flight mode. I want you to be stronger, faster, more efficient. So through my sympathetic system to my adrenal glands, I want to secrete adrenaline, also called epinephrine. Heart, be stronger, faster, more efficient. We need more blood to run away or fight. Or I just had turkey dinner. It's time for me to go take a nap. I don't need my muscles, shut them down. Go take a nap, lie down, calm down, parasympathetic system to the vagus nerve. But if the vagus nerve is overstimulating the SA node, it may be causing the heart to go slow inappropriately. There are maneuvers, vagal maneuvers. If you do ACLS, you'll learn the vagal maneuvers. If you get trained by your individual provider, out in the field, out in the clinics, whatever, they can teach you the vagal maneuvers, all right? But I'm not gonna do that in this video, all right? Because again, you should be trained, supervised on how and when to use these and not just play at parties. Yeah, I've had medics that have done that and, you know, pass out for the fun of it. Not a cool thing, but yes, they're entertained by it. But we also might get into pacing. So if your heart's not beating fast enough, all right, because it's not firing electrically often enough, maybe we need to get in there and shock it. When we shock it, it's going to beat once, so we're going to shock it every second to pick up the pace. We call that pacemaker. So you put an AED on it, might start shocking them every second. Or if you get the EKG machine, there's a dial that says pacer, and that's what we're ready to shock it at a rate that we decide to make it beat, because every shock is going to make it beat, and we're going to make it beat at 70 or 65, whatever we choose. So we're going to put that EKG machine on pacer mode, and then shock away. So don't be touching the patient because they'll be shocked electricity every second or so. All right, so that's bradycardia, where we see this sinus rhythm, but it's too slow. Or tachycardia, we see this sinus rhythm, but it's too fast. And what do we need to do about that? All right, then, but those are sinus rhythms because I see a P wave followed by a QRS 1-to-1 ratio. Well, what might I see that's not that? We might have a fib. In a fib, normally we have one person in charge setting the pace for the heart. In a fib, nobody's in charge. All right? They're all trying to be in charge. They're all arguing. The atrius quivering, shocks are happening all over the place. The AV node's getting bombarded with all this noise. Eventually, it's going to take a signal and send it down. It's going to fire a QRS complex. But what you see here on the EKG, instead of this nice baseline with the P wave, you just see a quivering going down and an occasional QRS. So everybody's arguing. All right? So quivering baseline, tight QRS, whether the overall rate is slow, fast, all right, we'll respond to that. But the key is the AFib, you got that quivering baseline. The other is a flutter. Whether a flutter is actually one cell or a group of cells that are fluttering or firing too fast. Fast flutter wave. Another way to see it is a sawtooth. So you see this sawtooth pattern. It's just kind of jaggedy, but it's not that quivering. It's more rhythmical. And then you see the QRSs pop in there as a signal hits that AV node just right and fires electrically. And then when that AV node resets, somebody else hits it just right. But you have that sawtooth baseline. All right? In both of these, we start going, well, how you feeling? If you're about to pass out, you're passing out, you're really lightheaded, you're unstable, we're going to go, clear. And when we go, clear, what we're doing is saying, everybody shut up. And we step back and wait for one person to be in charge. So we're resetting the heart. All right, so you see these two, if they are unstable, passing out, we're just going to hit them with electricity and get them stable. But if you're just standing there, sitting there going, well, I feel my heart fluttering, I got a little lightheadedness, you know, this is uncomfortable, and you check them, yeah, you're in AFib. I don't want to go clear while they're awake. So maybe I go, all right, let's take a moment, start an IV, let's give you some night-night juice. Then we'll go clear while you're asleep. So you won't remember. You wake up, you have soreness on your chest, but at least you won't remember all electricity punching your chest. I did have a guy who was about 6'4", 350 pounds, big dude. Was in a AFib, they decided to cardiovert, we call that. And so they put him to sleep. They went on chest, clear, he went, that small jolt woke his ass up. He won't remember, but I was impressed. All right? So if they're unstable, just clear. If they're stable and you want to convert them, you sedate them first, then you add electricity. The other is where it's kind of like AFib and everybody's arguing, but it's not as bad. So you get this guy fires, you get a P wave, QRS complex, the whole thing. But then this guy fires. You get a P wave, AV node, QRS complex. Then this guy fires. AV node, bundle of his QRS complex. Then this guy fires. So you'll see nice tight QRSs, but every P wave is going to look different because it's a different person firing. And each one is going to be a different angle from whatever view you're getting. So you're getting a variable looking P wave. There's clearly a P wave, but it changes. And we call that wandering atrial pacemaker. All right? So, variable P wave. The P wave keeps changing. All right? And so I hand it over to the cardiologist. We don't do that in ACLS with acute treatment. With AFib and flutter, if they're stable, hand to the cardiologist and let them cardiovert them and do all that kind of stuff, or manage them. If they're unstable, you got to cardiovert, add electricity. All right? Then we get into, okay, what happens with no P wave? All right? So sometimes, actually before I go there, I'm going to talk about P wave fires. We talked about different P waves. Now we hit the AV node issue. So sometimes this guy is sick. The AV node, the bundle of his are sick. Now I said this little interval is a measure of this, and this should be 3 to 5 boxes. All right? First we'll start with the one that's not sick. That is, some people are very athletic. And so when they're working out, their heart is very strong, it beats a lot of blood, so it doesn't beat that often. So they have a sinus bradycardia, athletic heart, no symptoms, nobody cares, but when you do an EKG for a physical or something, you're going to notice that everything is slowed, including the PR interval. It's going to be longer than 5 boxes. But it's fixed. Every single one is exactly the same. Every single one is just a little longer. We call it the first degree heart block. Nobody cares. It's a sign of an athletic, healthy heart. But when the P wave distance varies, so you have the same P wave every time, but that distance varies, or occasionally you have it, and there's no QRS, it drops. It just disappears. You had a P wave, no QRS. P wave with a QRS, P wave, PQRS, P wave, no QRS. Or this varies, then we get into the second degree heart blocks. Third degree is when they're just not talking to each other at all. P wave fires, it marches out, he's trying to do his job, but the AV node, bundle of his are like broken, and so it's completely dissociated from the QRS complex. That's going to happen, because somebody else is going to take over the ventricles and fire the ventricles, all right, completely separate from the P wave, so there's complete disconnect, complete heart block. There's a block across the AV node, complete heart block, third degree. All right, so second is variable with some misses occasionally. Third is, nope, they're not talking to each other at all. All right, So those are the heart blocks. Sometimes you get a little do loop in this area. So if fire is normal, but then electricity leaks back up and re-stimulates it before the SA node can do the normal thing. So you start getting really tight QRSs, but they're happening too fast. We call that supraventricular tachycardia. All right? Tight and fast. So QRSs are tight, but they're happening too fast. There's no P wave to drive it, so it's not a sinus tachycardia. It's a re-entry tachycardia. And the cool thing about this, using the cool word in quotes, we get to kill you to make you better. True story, I was teaching some medics over lunch, and I get a call from the sergeant major's wife. She tells me her daughter was in the shower, got lightheaded, almost passed out. And I said, okay, we'll bring her down to the clinic. She came down to the clinic, sent her over with some of the medics and said, get some vital signs, get an EKG, pulse ox, you know, the whole 9 yards. And then I take a break from teaching, I go over there, I check it out. And she's in ventricular tachycardia. I decide, well, I'm going to hand her over to the ER. So I bring her down to the ER with the mom, do a warm handoff with the doc, give him the EKG, give him the vitals, all the story. I say, I'll be back. I go back, I finish teaching my class, I come back a little later, and the mother tackles me. They killed her! They killed her! I was like, oh, they didn't warn you? Because when you're in this, we give you a medication called adenosine. And you're sitting there with your palpitations, IV going, we push you adenosine, and all of a sudden you go, whoa. And the machine goes, beep, 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 and you wake up. So for 6 seconds, we stop your heart. You're dead. You're out cold. Not breathing, no heartbeat, nothing. Asystole on the machine for 6 seconds. Your body metabolizes the medication, your heart restarts, and we hope your heart starts back into a normal sinus rhythm. And they didn't warn the mother before they did this. So, you gotta warn people. But, SVT, there's a short circuit re-entry, and it's running fast and tight, and depending on how symptomatic they are, you can do those vagal maneuvers. All right, I mentioned earlier, you can do or the adenosine. All right, I have some stories about the vagal maneuvers too. The next is you have a short circuit in the ventricle, and the ventricle is running too fast, V-tap. All right? So you've got one spot in charge but firing too fast through the ventricles. All right? So one in charge, too fast. All right? And these, because they're not going down this whole 80 node bundle of His, it's just traveling through the muscles. It's going to be a Y one, it's going to be the same one, and you're just going to see that baseline going up and down. I'm going to come back to finish a comment about that, and the next one is V-fib. And that's just like AFib, nobody's in charge, trying to die. Exclamation point. So nobody's in charge, everybody's arguing, they're quivering over here, just like AFib, except it's one thing for the top to quiver, it's another thing for the bottom to quiver, no blood's going to come out, you're going to die. Alright? So in these two, if you're trying to die, just like this, you're trying to die, step back, and hopefully somebody resets and takes over. If you're in VTAC, but you're awake and talking, you just run in too fast, we're going to want to convert you, but we're going to sedate you first. Just like over here where you're awake and you're okay, you're talking, you may be lightheaded, we're going to sedate you first, then hit you with electricity. But if you're unstable, we're just going to hit you with electricity. So if you're unstable in either of these, we're going to hit you with electricity. If you're stable, quasi-stable, we're going to sedate you first. If you're quasi-stable, we're going to sedate you first. But this one, in VFib, you're not putting out any blood, you're unstable. You see that in the mega code. The first thing you do if you see that is, you go, wait, check a pulse, you're responsive, because it may have been a lead just fell off or something like that. All right, so you want to check the patient first. And if they're unresponsive, no pulse, start CPR, get epi. Because all dead people get epi. All right, I don't care why you're dead. If you want to not be dead, you get CPR and epi. And then we go after the other things like the clear. The last thing to talk about is what we talk about PEA, pulseless electrical activity. So in PEA, you got a dead person, but you have a rhythm. So you see this on the EKG machine, but you check a pulse and there's no pulse. So if you have no pulse, what do you do? CPR, epi. Well, why would they have a rhythm? Maybe because they've got such hemorrhagic shock, there's no blood to pump, so the heart's just quivering against an empty chamber, trying to do something. Or there's a leak around the heart, bleeding around the heart, and the heart is crushed by this tamponade. Or maybe they have a massive blood clot, and blood can't flow against that blood clot, like a big PE, pulmonary embolism. There are reasons. We talk about the 5 H's and the 5 T's, all right, in ACLS. But the key is you have a dead person with a rhythm. So dead, but rhythm. So the EKG machine shows something, but you have no pulse, unresponsive patient, they're dead. And dead people get CPR, epi. And then you got to figure out if it's, can you fix something to make them not dead? All right, so we went over, again, normal heart. Every cell is capable of generating electricity. The SA node wins. It sets the pace. It's the pacemaker. Sends electricity across the atria. Electrical insulation keeps it from going to the ventricles. Little pinhole, the AV node, top of the antenna, captures that signal. Sends it down the bundle of His, the resistor to slow it down. Goes down the P fibers rapidly to the ventricles. Electrical signal, squeeze, release, squeeze, and we get signals. So P wave, SA node, PR interval, AV node, bundle of His, QRS complex, the P waves, and ST segment reset. Oh, one more thing. Sometimes when you're doing, especially somebody who has chest pain, stuff like that, that ST segment does this. It's depressed from baseline, or it does this. It's elevated from baseline. Sometimes this T wave even gets too big, and we call that rest in peace or tombstone T wave. But that ST segment deviating from baseline in someone you're suspecting of ischemic disease, heart attacks, angina, all right? That's what that's indicating. We even call this a STEMI, ST segment elevation myocardial infarction. Somebody has a STEMI, they're having a heart attack, with that ST segment elevation. So that's another thing you look at. So when you look at an EKG, you attach the 10 stickers, you hit the go button, you pull it off, you should see 1-to-1 ratio, P to QRS. Every P wave should look the same. They should march out, all right? No changes in the ST segment elevation. It should be a straight baseline, all right? And know that you're just looking at the same electrical event from 12 different angles. So some angles may see things that other angles don't. All right, so you look at each one and just make sure everything paces out and looks the same for that lead. And at the bottom, always add a rhythm strip, classically lead 2, so we can see the rhythm over time, all right, to really understand what's going on, looking for the different arrhythmias or dysrhythmias, all right? And so hopefully that helps you, again, going into ACLS or just having a baseline understanding. If you're the person that's hooking up the EKG, that when it pulls off, you can look at it real quick and go, oh crap, hey, doc, nurse practitioner, come here. Look at this. This looks funny right here. Rather than just going, boom, pull, oh, he's busy talking. And I'll just hold this while the person's having a heart attack or is in some dysrhythmia because I don't want to be disruptive because I don't know what I'm looking at. I don't expect you to read EKGs, but see some critical things that are easy for you to identify. All right? P-wave QRS, P-wave QRS, same P-wave every time, type QRS. All right? Thank you very much. Again, subscribe and out here.